The sun hung low over the dry plains, its last light burning the horizon red as fire. Dust swirled in the air, carried by a wind that smelled of sage and distant thunder. On the edge of a ragged clearing, a man's shadow stretched long across the cracked earth, his hand raised again and again, striking the girl who crouched before him. She did not scream. There was no sound, only the sharp, bitter sting of leather on skin. Her hair clung to her sweat-darkened face, and her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, glimmered in the dying light. A sudden sound stopped the whipping. A horse's hooves thudded against the dry ground, steady, unyielding. The girl's father, a hard-eyed man whose anger seemed carved into his face like lines in the desert rock, turned. There, framed against the fading sun, stood a figure unlike any he had ever seen. Broad-shouldered, skin dark and gleaming with the last sheen of daylight, the Apache warrior surveyed the scene with eyes as sharp and unflinching as a hawk's. His long hair, bound with leather and feathers, swung with the wind, and the obsidian blade at his side caught the light in a sudden glint that made the father flinch. "Sell her to me," the warrior said, his voice low but firm, carrying across the clearing like a command of the earth itself. "I need a woman." The father's hand froze midair, the whip trembling between his fingers. His jaw tightened. He was a man used to power, used to fear bending others to his will. But now, confronted by someone who seemed born of the land itself, his authority faltered. No. The girl's heart raced, a strange mixture of hope and terror rising in her chest. Could this stranger actually take her away? Could he save her from the endless beatings, the cruel control of a father who saw her only as possession? The Apache took a step closer, his gaze never leaving the father's. "I will pay whatever you ask. Let her go, and no harm will come to you." The wind carried the words, rustling through the dry grass and rattling the wooden fences that surrounded the homestead. The father spat to the side, his anger mingling with fear. "And why should I trust you?" he growled. "You are not of this town. You have no place here. She is mine to command." The warrior's expression did not change. But there was a calm intensity in his stance, a certainty that radiated like the desert sun. "I am of the plains," he said, "and the plains have no place for cruelty. Give her freedom, and you will not regret it. Refuse, and the land itself will judge you." The girl's eyes shifted between the two men, catching the tension in the air like a spark threatening to ignite a wildfire. She had grown up hearing stories of warriors who roamed the vast lands beyond the hills. Men who respected strength and courage above all else.
This one.
He carried that truth in the way he stood, in the quiet power that seemed to hum from his very bones. She felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, a flicker of trust, or perhaps hope, that she had thought long dead. The father's face twisted, torn between greed, pride, and fear. The Apache did not move closer, yet the space between them seemed charged, alive. Every muscle in the girl's body tensed. She could feel the history of the land itself pressing down, the stories of the rivers, the mesas, and the endless skies reminding her that life often changed in the blink of an eye. "Name your price," the Apache said at last, his voice steady as the earth beneath them. "Name it and she is yours no longer." The father looked away for a moment, his mind racing. There was gold in the town, hidden under floorboards and buried in the soil, enough to tempt even the most cautious man. But more than that, there was pride and stubbornness, and the crushing need to feel in control. Finally he raised his head, sweat beading on his furrowed brow, and spoke words that carried a weight far heavier than the coins he would demand. "She is not for sale," he spat. "No coin, no promise, no threat will take her from me. She is mine." The Apache warrior's eyes narrowed. He did not shift his stance, but the wind seemed to obey him, stirring the dust and grass in restless patterns. His voice dropped, low and steady, carrying the echo of storms and untamed lands. "Then you leave me no choice," he said. For a heartbeat, the clearing fell into a silence so deep it pressed against the ears. The girl's stomach nodded. Earthy instincts screamed at her that the next moments would decide the course of her life. The first real choice she had ever been given. She glanced at the warrior, feeling the pull of something she could not yet name. Something stronger than fear, stronger than the father who had always held her down. The father raised the whip once more, but his hands shook. The Apache warrior moved not with speed, but with an inevitability that made the air itself seem to bend. The girl's heart pounded, echoing the rhythm of hooves, wind, and the tension that hung thick between the men. Then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into shadow, a figure appeared on the ridge above the clearing, silhouette framed in the last red light, moving with purpose, yet unknown in intent. The girl's eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. Was it an ally or another threat? The father froze, and even the warrior paused, acknowledging a presence that neither of them could yet see clearly. The wind carried a distant voice, low and warning. A voice that promised change, danger, and choices that could not be undone. The girl's hand twitched, ready to seize the moment, to step into the unknown. But the ridge remained shrouded in shadow, the figure unmoving, silent, holding the story's next secret like a key in a locked box. The clearing was no longer just a place of punishment. It had become a crossroads of fate, where the choices of a single night could echo across the plains forever. And as the sun vanished completely, leaving the world in the quiet, haunting dark, one truth was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The night deepened, wrapping the clearing in a cloak of shadows, but the tension did not fade. The girl, whose name was Leora, stood rooted to the spot, her eyes darting between the Apache warrior, whose name was Tooken, and the figure on the ridge that had appeared without warning. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of smoke and distant pine, mingling with the acrid odor of fear and sweat. Somewhere beyond the ridge, coyotes howled, their cries slicing through the silence, as if announcing that the land itself was awake and watching. Leora's father, Harlan, backed a step, his chest heaving, his hand trembling despite the stubborn grip on the whip. He had always believed in the power of control, in fear as a tool to bend others to his will. But now, confronted by Taucon's unshakable presence and the mysterious figure above, Harlan realized that the rules of his world were no longer certain. He had built his life on domination, yet here was a force he could not command. Tooken did not move toward the ridge, nor did he flinch. His gaze remained locked on Harlan, his posture calm but deliberate. It's like a mountain that could not be moved yet, would endure everything around it. Leora could see the faint outline of tattoos along his forearms, symbols she did not understand but that seemed to hum with meaning. She had heard stories of Apache warriors, of men who carried the history of their people in every scar and mark, and now she saw it before her, alive and imposing. "You do not understand," Harlan muttered, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and unease. "I have rights here. She is my blood, my responsibility." Tooken's lips pressed into a thin line, and his voice came slow, measured, each word heavy with unspoken weight. "Blood does not make a chain, Harlan. Fear is not law, and cruelty. Cruelty answers only to itself." Leora's pulse quickened. She wanted to step forward, to speak, to plead for herself, but her throat tightened, and she could not find words. The father she had known all her life, the man who had struck her for the smallest defiance, now seemed smaller than the shadows that stretched across the clearing. And yet beneath the fear and rage in his eyes, there was stubbornness, the kind that refused to yield even when reason demanded it. The figure on the ridge shifted. Leora squinted, trying to make out more than the dark silhouette against the night sky. The figure carried something she could not yet tell what tan there was, a weight in the way it moved that suggested purpose, perhaps threat. For a moment the clearing felt like the center of the world, a stage upon which every choice would echo across the land. Tooken took a deliberate step forward. The sound of his boots on the dry earth was solid, grounding, almost like the drumbeat of a distant ritual. "You must decide," he said to Harlan. "Every moment you hesitate strengthens the darkness around this place. The land does not wait, the wind does not wait, and she cannot wait either." Harlan's eyes darted to Leora, who met his gaze without flinching. For the first time, she saw doubt flicker there, a shadow beneath the harsh mask he had worn for so long. And yet pride held him fast. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I will not give in, not to you, not to anyone." Tooken's eyes narrowed, and the faintest flicker of movement passed over his face, an expression Leora had never seen before, and one that unsettled her more than any threat could. It was not anger, nor was it fear. It was something older, something that carried the weight of the plains, of history, and of choices made long before any of them were born. "You speak of ownership," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "Yet she has never belonged to you. You punish her as if she were a possession, but the earth does not belong to anyone, and neither does she. She is her own." Leora's chest tightened. Those words stirred something inside her, a spark that had been buried beneath years of fear and obedience. She had never known freedom, not truly, and yet the idea of it now hovered at the edge of her mind, fragile and dazzling. She wanted to step forward, to speak, to claim that spark, but the presence of the figure on the ridge froze her. The ridge itself seemed to lean closer, as if the land had shifted to observe what was unfolding below. The figure's identity remained hidden, and Leora felt the weight of mystery pressing down on her. Who was it? Friend or foe? And what did it want with the clearing, with the two men locked in an unspoken battle of wills? Harlan's grip on the whip loosened slightly. He spat to the side, trying to assert control, but his movements were slower, hesitant. He glanced toward the ridge, and in that brief moment, Leora saw a crack in his armor, a fissure where fear and uncertainty had taken root. Token did not rush him. Instead, he waited, patient and unyielding, like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. "You cannot hide from what is coming," he said. "The plains have memory, and they remember every act of cruelty, every act of injustice. The land is patient, but it is also just." Leora's mind raced. She did not understand all the words, nor did she fully grasp the weight of what Tauken implied, but she could feel it in her bones. The night, the ridge, the warrior, they were not merely obstacles or threats. They were part of a story, one that was larger than the clearing, larger than the father who had held her captive in fear. And then a sound broke the tension, a soft rustle from the ridge, like the movement of fabric against stone. The figure shifted again, and this time Leora caught a glimpse of eyes, glinting in the faint moonlight. They were not afraid. They were not pleading. They were watching, calculating, waiting. Harlan's face paled. He muttered something under his breath, words that carried no meaning to Leora, but whose tone dripped with panic. He tightened his grip on the whip one last time, but his knuckles were white, and his movements betrayed the cracks in his resolve. Leora felt a strange calm settle over her. It was not fear, though fear still lingered like a shadow. It was something else, a recognition that change was coming, and that she might have a choice in the path her life would take. She did not yet know how to seize it, nor what the consequences would be, but the possibility alone made her chest ache with longing. Tyokin's gaze flicked to the ridge, and for the first time, Leora noticed the faint tension in his shoulders. The figure there was no ordinary observer. There was power in the way it moved, and Leora felt certain that its intentions were intertwined with her fate in ways she could not yet understand. "Decide, Harlan," Token said, his voice carrying over the clearing. "Every moment you delay seals a path and opens another. Choose wisely." The wind picked up, whipping dust and loose leaves across the ground, scattering them like pieces of a story yet to be written. The ridge loomed, the figure's shadow stretching long across the earth, blending with the darkness of night. Leora felt her pulse quicken, a combination of fear, anticipation, and a strange, unnameable hope. The story of the night, of the clearing of Tauken and her father, was only beginning. And somewhere in the shadows, the world waited. The plains waited, the ridge waited. And the unknown figure on the ridge, watching silently, held the next secret, the next turn. The next challenge that would shape Leora's life in ways she could not yet imagine. The clearing was alive with tension, and the night was far from over. Decisions hung in the air like sparks waiting to ignite. Leora's heart thrummed with the promise of change, the weight of choices, and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The night stretched on, thick with heat and tension, and yet the stars above shone like indifferent witnesses to the struggle below. Leora's pulse beat in her ears, louder than the wind rustling through the prairie grass. She remained close to the edge of the clearing, watching Tauken and Harlan as if every twitch of their muscles carried the weight of destiny. And yet, her attention kept drifting upward, to the figure on the ridge, whose silence had become an unshakable presence in her mind. Harlan moved at last, his steps uncertain, shuffling across the dry earth like a man walking a thin line over a canyon. He stopped, glanced at Token, then back at Leora, his face twisting with anger, pride, and fear all at once. You think a few words and a shadow on the ridge can make me bend? I have raised her. I have endured the plains. I know the cost of letting someone else take what is mine. Token did not reply immediately. He let the words hang heavy as stones in the hot night air. Then he said, "Raising is not owning. Enduring is not justice. You mistake possession for strength, Harlan, and the land will correct that mistake, whether you are ready or not." Leora shivered, partly from the cool night wind, partly from the truth in those words. She had lived under Harlan's shadow all her life, and yet she had always known, deep down, that something inside her longed for more than obedience, for more than fear. The idea of freedom had never been real, till this night. From the ridge, the figure shifted again. Leora caught the glint of a knife in the moonlight, and her stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they were not merely an observer. They had a plan. And the plan involved her. Token's eyes flicked toward the ridge for a fraction of a moment, and the tension in his shoulders tightened. There was history there, a story that Leora could not yet understand, but that carried weight heavy enough to shake even a warrior like him. Harlan, sensing the shift, raised the whip again, but his voice wavered. "I will not let you take her. Not now, not ever." The words were defiance, but also desperation. He glanced toward the ridge, and for a brief moment, his gaze lingered longer than it should have. He had secrets, Leora realized, secrets he had buried under years of control, under the pretense of authority. She had always assumed he was simple in his anger, simple in his cruelty. Now she saw the complexity, the fear beneath the surface, and it frightened her more than his violence ever had. Token stepped closer, his boots pressing into the hard earth. "You have a choice," he said, calm and unyielding. "You can continue to cling to fear, or you can let go and face what is coming. The plains do not forgive cruelty, Harlan. You know this in your heart." The wind shifted again, and from the ridge came the faintest sound of movement. A branch snapped. The figure moved closer, and Leora could now see the outline of a cloak, dark against the moon. They carried something, a small satchel, or perhaps a bundle, but its contents were hidden. There was intent in the way they moved, deliberate, unhurried, yet unstoppable. Leora's mind raced. Who were they? Why had they come? Were they friend or foe? And how did they know to appear here, in this moment, when everything in her life seemed poised on the edge of change? She glanced at Token, but he offered no answer, only a steady gaze that seemed to say, "Watch, wait, and learn." Harlan's breathing was ragged now, sweat glistening on his brow, his hands shaking with effort to maintain control. "I will not bend to anyone," he said again, though the words sounded weaker than before. He glanced at Leora, his eyes searching for some flicker of loyalty, some sign that she would side with him, but she met his gaze with her own, unflinching. And he saw nothing there but a spark he had not expected, a spark that frightened him more than Token ever could. The figure on the ridge shifted once more, stepping into a thin shaft of moonlight. Leora could see now that it was a woman, tall and lean, her eyes sharp and unafraid. Her presence alone seemed to draw the shadows closer, as if the night itself recognized her power. The satchel at her side swung gently as she moved, but she did not speak. Instead, she simply watched, and the silence was louder than any command. Token's eyes narrowed. "She has come," he said, almost under his breath. There was a recognition there, an understanding that went beyond words. Leora felt it too, a sense that the world was shifting in ways she could not yet see, that the balance of power was tilting. Harlan flinched. He had recognized the woman, or at least knew her significance. His hand trembled on the whip. "No," he muttered, "it cannot be. Not here." The tension thickened, wrapping around Leora like a tightening rope. She felt the pull of every story she had ever heard, every warning whispered by wind or firelight. The plains had memory, and she was standing in the middle of it, caught between history and the unknown, between the father who had held her and the warriors who sought her freedom. The woman on the ridge stepped closer, her movements fluid, deliberate. She did not speak, yet her eyes held questions, warnings, and promises all at once. Leora sensed that she carried answers, but also dangers. And she knew instinctively that the next moments could change everything. Token took another step, his voice firm. "The choice is not hers alone, Harlan." Every moment you refuse to see the truth draws her closer to the life she deserves, with or without you. Harlan's hands shook visibly. He seemed to wrestle with the weight of something unseen, a fear that clawed at him from inside and out. He glanced at the ridge again, then back at Leora, whose heart now raced with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. She did not yet understand the full scope of what was happening, but she could feel the threads of fate weaving around her, drawing her toward something vast and unpredictable. From the ridge, the woman moved once more. A faint glimmer of silver caught the moonlight, a chain, perhaps, or the strap of the satchel. Leora's pulse quickened. The object seemed insignificant, yet charged with meaning. She did not know why, but she understood that it mattered, that whatever it held could tip the balance of the night in ways she could not yet see. Tehoken's gaze followed the motion, sharp and unblinking. "Prepare yourself," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The night carries more than shadows." Harlan stumbled back a step, finally dropping the whip to the ground. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of surrender, or at least hesitation. Looked at Leora with something he had never shown before, a mixture of fear, recognition, and the faintest trace of regret. Leora felt the stirrings of hope, yet it was tempered by the knowledge that danger had not passed. The ridge, the woman Tehoken and her father, each held pieces of a puzzle she could not yet see, and in the darkness she sensed more threads, more secrets waiting to be revealed. The night was far from over, and the plains whispered of choices yet to be made, battles yet to come, and truths that would not be gentle. Somewhere in the shadows, a distant howl echoed. A coyote, or perhaps something larger, answered the tension in the clearing. Leora's heart thudded in rhythm with the sound, and she realized that the night had become a living thing, pressing on every side, demanding courage, patience, and vigilance. She looked at Tehoken, whose presence was steady, grounding, yet full of silent warnings. Then she looked to the ridge, to the woman whose purpose remained a mystery. And finally she glanced at Harlan, whose fear now threatened to consume him. The clearing was no longer a simple place of punishment. It had become the center of a storm, a crucible in which loyalties, fears, and courage would be tested. Every heartbeat, every movement carried consequence. Leora knew with a certainty that left her breathless that the coming hours would shape the course of her life forever. The night held its breath. The wind stilled for a moment. The stars seemed to lean closer, watching, waiting. And the figure on the ridge, silent and unyielding, took one final step forward, leaving the outcome suspended. The story hanging on the knife edge of choice and destiny. Leora's pulse raced. She wanted to move, to speak, to act, but she could not. The night had become a living labyrinth, and every path seemed dangerous, uncertain, yet irresistible. Her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the plains, to the warriors, to the unknown woman, and to the father who had feared he could hold her forever. The tension held, thick and unbroken, as the clearing waited for the next move, the next spark, the next revelation. And somewhere deep in the night, the plains whispered of power, of freedom, and of the cost of every choice yet to come. The wind shifted again, carrying a chill that bit at Leora's skin despite the warmth of the plains. Shadows stretched longer now, merging with the night, as if the darkness itself were leaning in closer to witness what was about to unfold. The ridge figure had moved lower, almost to the edge of the clearing, and the faint silver glint of the satchel caught the moonlight like a secret being revealed slowly. Leora could feel her pulse hammering, a rhythm in sync with the tension that pressed on every side. Harlan's eyes darted between Tehoken and the ridge woman. For the first time, the lines of cruelty that had defined him seemed to falter. His chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths, and his hands trembled as if the very earth beneath him had turned against his control. I will not," he began, but the words stuck in his throat. Tehoken's gaze was unwavering. His presence radiated calm power, yet there was something in the tilt of his shoulders, the set of his jaw that hinted at the storm coiled beneath the surface. He had faced death more times than Leora could imagine, yet even he now felt the weight of the night pressing on him like a living thing. He did not speak for a moment, letting Harlan's fear swell, letting the silence stretch, heavy as stone. The ridge woman stepped closer, her boots crunching softly against the dry soil. Her cloak shifted, revealing a glimpse of leather-bound tools at her belt, and the satchel swung gently at her side. She did not speak, but her eyes, dark and sharp, held a story that seemed older than the clearing itself. Leora felt a strange pull toward her, an instinct she did not yet understand but trusted with every fiber of her being. "Enough," Token finally said, his voice low and steady, carrying across the clearing like the echo of distant thunder. "Every moment of hesitation brings danger closer. Choose now, Harlan, before the consequences become heavier than your pride can bear." Harlan's hands clenched into fists. He had ruled his household with fear, with cruelty, with the iron certainty that no one could challenge him. But now, confronted by the warrior and the woman on the ridge, confronted by the courage and quiet defiance in Leora's eyes, he felt the first true cracks in his foundation. His power, once absolute, felt fragile, like dried clay under relentless sun. Leora's gaze flicked to Token. There was trust there, but also warning. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Every instinct screamed that the choices made in these next moments would echo across her life forever. She wanted to speak, to step forward, to claim even the smallest portion of control, but the tension in the air held her still, frozen by anticipation. From the ridge, the woman moved again, and this time the moonlight revealed more. Her face was strong, fierce, yet marked with the same wariness that comes from walking long, dangerous paths alone. Leora could sense that the woman had survived trials far greater than any she could imagine. And yet she carried herself with a measured grace, like a predator aware of every movement in its surroundings. Harlan took a step back, finally letting the whip drop entirely. It fell to the ground with a hollow thud, a sound that seemed louder than any strike. "I will not let her go," he said, but even his voice betrayed doubt. He glanced toward the ridge, where the woman remained poised, silent, holding a kind of power that did not belong to this small clearing, but to the wide plains themselves. Tokon's eyes flicked toward Leora, sharp and calculating. "Do you understand?" he asked quietly. "The choice is yours as much as his. You can remain in fear, or you can step into what is waiting for you." Leora swallowed hard. The air seemed to press against her chest, heavy with possibility and danger. Every instinct told her to obey, to stay silent, to retreat into the shadows of her father's control. But another voice, quiet and insistent, rose within her, a voice that spoke of freedom, of strength, of the life she had never been allowed to claim. She clenched her fists, feeling the tension coiling like a spring inside her. The ridge woman lowered the satchel, revealing a glint of what looked like metal, faint and unfamiliar. Leora could not see exactly what it was, but she sensed its importance. The woman did not move closer yet, nor did she speak, letting the suspense of her presence grow, adding another layer of uncertainty to the already tense night. Harlan's eyes followed the movement, his hands trembling as he realized the depth of what he faced. He had believed that fear could command the world, that cruelty could bend even the strongest wills. Now, confronted by forces he could not control, the warrior, the ridge woman, and his daughter's emerging courage, he felt his dominance slipping like sand through fingers. Tokon's stance shifted slightly, signaling readiness, a predator poised for action, yet patient. His voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "Do not mistake hesitation for power, Harlan. The plains remember, the night remembers. Every act of cruelty has a consequence, and that consequence is waiting at your feet." Leora's eyes widened as the reality of his words sank in. The night was not empty. It carried memory, history, and judgment. The ridge, the wind, the stars above, they all seemed alive, watching, waiting. The woman moved again, lowering herself slightly, as if preparing for a step that could change everything. Leora's pulse raced in anticipation, knowing that the smallest movement could tip the scales entirely. Harlan's breath came in short gasps. He glanced at Leora, his eyes searching for some flicker of submission, some sign that she would side with him. But her gaze was steady, unflinching. He could see the spark there, a fire he had tried for years to extinguish, now roaring quietly in the night. His hand twitched, but no words came. His power, once absolute, seemed meaningless in the face of the courage and determination he saw before him. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust, mingling with the faint coppery temps of blood that lingered from earlier wounds. Every rustle, every shadow, every whisper of sound added to the tension, like the tightening of a bowstring ready to release. Leora felt the pull of every moment, the choice, the danger, the unknown. She realized that she was standing at the center of a story far larger than herself. From the ridge, the woman finally moved closer, her cloak brushing the ground. Leora could see the resolve in her eyes, a silent promise of action, of answers yet to come. She carried a calm authority that contrasted sharply with Harlan's frantic fear and Tyokan's quiet power. Every step she took added weight to the night, every movement a signal that the balance of power was shifting. Leora's chest ached with anticipation. Tension in the clearing had reached a fever pitch. The ridge, the plains, the warriors, her father all converged in a moment that seemed to stretch time itself. She could feel the possibilities branching outward, every choice carrying consequences she could not yet predict. Harlan's knees trembled as he glanced at the woman. He understood, finally, that the forces arrayed against him were not simply human, they carried the weight of history, of justice, of the plains themselves. Fear, pride, and stubbornness collided in him. And for the first time he questioned whether he could maintain control at all. Tyokan's eyes met Leora's, and in that glance she understood everything without words. The night demanded courage, and the clearing would not forgive hesitation. The ridge woman's presence made it clear that change was inevitable. Every heartbeat echoed with danger, promise, and the whisper of freedom. The wind swirled, scattering dust and leaves, carrying distant howls from the plains. Shadows twisted, as if alive, and the night seemed to hold its breath. Leora felt the coiling tension inside her, the weight of fear and hope entwined, knowing that the next moment could break everything or set it right. The ridge woman paused at the edge of the clearing, satchel in hand, eyes unwavering. Token shifted slightly, ready for action, but patient, like a river before the first drop of rain falls. Harlan's breath rattled in his chest, the last threads of control fraying fast. And Leora, standing between all of it, felt the pull of destiny, the stirrings of courage, and the unshakable knowledge that her life would change before the night was done. The clearing, once silent, now seemed alive with the weight of the coming storm. Every movement, every glance, every word unsaid held power. The ridge, the plains, and the stars above bore witness, carrying the tension like a living thing. And in that suspended moment, Leora realized that the climax of her story was near. Poised on the edge of action, danger, and the first real choice she had ever been given. The night held its breath. The ridge woman shifted once more, her presence signaling the imminent surge of events. Tokan's body tensed, ready to act, but restrained by patience and calculation. Harlan's fear reached its peak, his every instinct screaming for control he could no longer claim. And Leora, her chest tight with anticipation, knew that whatever happened next would determine the course of her life, the balance of the clearing, and the fates of everyone in the night. The air hummed with suspense, the plains whispered their secrets, and the clearing waited, every shadow, every gust of wind, every heartbeat heavy with the promise of action yet to come. The story had reached the precipice, and the next movement would tip the scales, leaving nothing unchanged, nothing untouched. The clearing remained tense for a heartbeat longer, as if the night itself waited to see who would move first. Then Leora felt a surge of courage rising inside her, raw and undeniable. She took a step forward, slow but deliberate, her eyes fixed on Harlan. "No more," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I'm done living in fear. My will not be yours to command." Harlan's face paled, and for a moment he seemed frozen, the last vestiges of pride and control crumbling. He opened his mouth, perhaps to shout, perhaps to argue, but the words never came. His gaze shifted to Tauken, and then to the woman on the ridge, who finally stepped into the clearing, the satchel swinging lightly at her side. Her name was Kiona, and every step she took carried purpose. She placed the satchel carefully on the ground and opened it to reveal blankets, tools, and a small bundle of carefully wrapped provisions. Leora realized that Kiona had come not just as a presence of power, but as a guide, prepared for the journey that lay ahead. Her eyes met Leora's, and in that look there was reassurance, wisdom, and an unspoken promise of protection. Token relaxed slightly, though his stance remained watchful. "It is done," he said quietly to Harlan, though not cruelly. "The choice is made. She will walk her path, and you must accept it." Harlan's jaw tightened. For years he had believed fear and cruelty were enough to hold life in his hands. Now, confronted by the truth in Leora's eyes, confronted by the courage of two warriors, he understood the futility of resistance. Slowly he nodded, the tension in his body melting into reluctant acceptance. "Go," he said, his voice heavy with defeat and the faintest trace of regret. "Go, and may the plains watch over you." Leora's chest swelled, a mixture of relief and cautious hope. She stepped forward fully, moving beside Tokan and Kiona, feeling for the first time that she was no longer bound by fear, no longer confined by someone else's control. The clearing felt different now, lighter, as if the night itself had acknowledged the shift in power, the birth of something new. Kiona knelt beside the satchel and motioned for Leora to gather the provisions. "We do not have much time," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "The plains are alive tonight. There are dangers you have not yet seen. We must move before the wind changes." Teokan mounted his horse, the familiar weight of the saddle comforting against the tension in his muscles. "The journey will be long," he said to Leora, "but it is your own. Every step you take now is yours to claim, every choice yours to make." Leora nodded, feeling the power of her own agency for the first time. She gathered the supplies, slinging the bundle across her shoulder, and looked at Harlan one last time. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now held something softer, regret perhaps, or the faint recognition of the wrongs he had done. She did not speak. There were no words necessary. The night, the wind, and the plains themselves had spoken. The ride began in silence, the horses' hooves thudding against the dry earth, carrying them away from the clearing and the past Leora had known. The stars above shone bright and cold, but they were not indifferent. They marked the path, guiding the three travelers into the unknown, yet offering a sense of direction and hope. Kiona rode slightly ahead, scanning the horizon with careful, practiced eyes. "There are settlements not far from here," she said, "places where you can rest and find safety. But the journey through the open plains is dangerous. You must trust your instincts and each other." Leora glanced at Tauken. He nodded silently, acknowledging both the threat and the promise in Kiona's words. He had been a warrior all his life, yet even he understood the fragility of the moment, the fine line between freedom and danger. As the night deepened, the plains around them stretched wide and open, the moon casting silver light across rolling hills and jagged rock formations. Leora felt the wind on her face, smelled the sage and dry earth, and realized she had never truly breathed before. The fear, the oppression, the weight of her father's cruelty, it all fell away with each step, leaving her with clarity, strength, and determination she had never known. Hours passed, and the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in faint shades of gold and rose. The clearing, now far behind, seemed like a distant memory, yet it lingered in her mind as a lesson of courage and the cost of control. Every scar, every fear she had carried now felt transformed into wisdom. Tempered by the night and by those who had guided her out of darkness, they stopped by a small river, its waters running clear and fast. Kiona dismounted and gestured for Leora to do the same. "Rest," she said. "Take what you need. But remember, the plains are patient, but they are also unforgiving. We move again soon." Leora knelt by the river, letting her hands touch the cool water, watching her reflection ripple and distort. For the first time, she saw herself as she truly was: strong, capable, and free. She glanced at Tauken, who stood nearby, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We made it this far," she said softly. "But I still don't know what lies ahead." He smiled faintly, the first warmth in his expression all night. "The unknown is where we grow," he said. "The journey teaches us what we cannot learn in the safety of walls or shadows." "You will see, Leora, you will see." Kiona joined them, offering a small piece of bread and a water flask. "Even when the path seems uncertain, the choices you make define you. You have taken your first step. That is more than most ever do." The morning light strengthened, illuminating the vast plains and distant hills. Leora felt the power of the world around her, vast, untamed, and full of possibility. The fears of the night, the whip, the father's tyranny, The shadowed ridge were still memories, but they no longer held power over her. She had claimed her life, her courage, and her freedom. As they continued their journey, the three moved with purpose. The plains stretched wide and open, yet they no longer seemed threatening. Every hill, every gust of wind, every distant sound became part of the story Leora was writing with her own steps. She knew there would be challenges ahead, danger, fatigue, perhaps even those who would wish to reclaim control over her life, but she also knew she would meet them with strength and clarity she had never possessed before. By mid-morning, they reached a small settlement tucked between the hills. Smoke rose from chimneys, horses neighed in fenced yards, and the hum of life carried a sense of calm and safety. Kiona guided them to a modest house where they could rest, and Leora stepped inside with a sense of relief she had never imagined possible. As the door closed behind them, she turned to Tokan and Kiona. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady. I don't know how I could have done this without you." Teokan placed a firm hand on her shoulder, a gesture of strength and reassurance. "You did this," he said. "We only helped you find what was already inside." Kiona nodded, her eyes warm with approval. "Remember this feeling," she said. "Freedom is not given lightly. It is earned with courage, choice, and determination. You have all three?" Leora took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift and the promise of the future settle over her like a soft mantle. She looked around the small house, the settlement, and out toward the open plains, realizing that the world was vast, dangerous, and full of opportunity. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Harlan, far behind them, would remain in the clearing, a man forced to reckon with his choices, to face the consequences of his cruelty. The plains would remember, and so would Leora. But she had stepped beyond fear into her own power, and nothing could take that from her. As the sun climbed higher, painting the world in gold and warmth, Leora smiled faintly, a smile of quiet triumph. She was free, she was alive. And the journey ahead, full of unknowns and promise, awaited her with open arms. Token mounted his horse again, and Kiona adjusted the satchel over her shoulder. Leora followed, heart steady, steps certain. Together, they rode into the open plains, leaving the shadows of the past behind, ready to face the horizon and whatever the world had in store. The plains whispered around them, carrying the echoes of the night, the courage of a girl who had chosen herself, and the promise of life reclaimed. And as they disappeared over the first hill, the world seemed to pause in quiet recognition, honoring a journey that had begun in fear but ended in freedom, strength, and hope.